TDOT plan that came out, one thing we found out, and Mayor Jacobs has talked about this a little bit, is that some of the projects planned for the I-40 corridor through West Knox County have been either scaled back or delayed at Campbell Station Road and at Watt Road, and that's a concern obviously for the folks who live out there who are looking for those improvements. So anything you can tell us about that would be great. And then second, I think last year when we were here, there was some discussion about pushing for a long-term bypass route for I-75. I'm just curious if that has moved at all or what the next steps in that process would be.
Okay, thank you. It's a good question because I'm in a lot of these conversations, but the first one that's probably easier is the bill we passed last year authorized the ability to do choice lanes in Tennessee in the 4 urban areas. Had we not passed, we put a record amount of general fund monies into road projects. Had we not infused that $3 extra billion into these road projects, it would have taken kids in high school, would have been senior citizens by the time we got through all those projects. So we had to do something different. The choice lane, we put also $300 million into each county's road fund. I mean, not each county didn't get $3 billion, or 3 million. But it's, but we put that in there, the $300 million, which was 15 times what each county normally gets for their county road funds, so they could do local projects. But the choice lane projects basically, because the biggest problem is in the urban areas, if we hadn't done something like these choice lane, authorized these choice lane projects, all the funds that we have coming in Tennessee would have had to go into the urban projects at the expense of not doing anything in our rural areas or even some of our suburban areas. So what they're doing is they're looking at each of the 4 urban areas, and it was divided equally. A private investor would come in and do a public-private partnership on that project in that area, and then we would leverage that money we saved by doing that choice lane, let's say in Nashville, where they're looking at the first one going, and we can use that same amount in suburban or rural projects. But as a part of that, I've been talking to him for years about doing a new bypass study, because the old bypass study, the orange and the blue, you know, we could probably come up with any color, but it's obsolete. And I said, just do me a study, because we have, while we don't have sustained long traffic jams, we still have 5 of the top 7 highest average daily traffic counts in the state. And that's because we're 2 interstates combined into 1 for 18 miles. And so it's challenging. And if they're not coming to moving here, they're driving through here to get north, south, or east, west. And so the second we finished passing the Transportation Modernization Act, and I was able to be the sponsor that carried it through the legislation, and it was really cool. In 7 weeks' time, we passed that with 79% of the vote, bipartisan support. And it was a good bill, and it needed to happen. That doesn't mean people don't have pros and cons of different pieces of it, but it was a good piece of legislation. But the second it passed, I said, okay, about my bypass study. I need a bypass study. So what I'm looking at is, as they're looking at a potential choice lane project here down the, later on, then, they'll do the first one in Nashville and get the kinks worked out and figure it all out. But they can also look at the bypass potential, and whether at some point that solves our problem and we don't need the choice lanes here, or whether we ultimately need both. But they are going to be working on that study. Regarding the other thing, the Department of TDOT basically decided that what had been happening is they put all these projects on the list, but they wouldn't be funded. Very few would be funded for, in an immediate type future. You might be on a 3-year plan, but you might have year 1 funded, but then you might not get year 2 and 3. So they said, we need to be more efficient, which is on our short-term list. So they went in, they looked at all the projects in the state. They analyzed, all the components of it, whether it was economic development, whether it was the traffic load, whether it was the growth in that area, and all the various things that they would look at. And they kind of charted them all out, gave them point scales, and they came down with the ones that needed to be first in the 3-year plan, that they said if they're in the 3-year plan, they're going to be funded. That funding is going to be there. And then they did years 4 through 10, which can be movable. I mean, that can change based on the change of what's happening. And so what happened was, a couple of years ago, there was some extra general fund money several years ago that they put some economic development projects into the budget from some general fund money. They probably did it a little quicker than they needed to, but they allotted a certain amount for Campbell Station and a certain amount for Watt Road interchanges there. And Campbell Station has been talking to us, Senator Briggs and I, for years about the need to expand that just because of the load and the backup and the growth out there. Watt Road, they're doing some major economic development up there, a huge project. So what happened was, one, they were underfunded in the budget. So the budget that was amounted to it is not enough to do what needs to be done. Campbell Station, they would have to widen the bridges, expand the bridges over it so they could expand it underneath it. And so they pushed it down, further down the line in the project list. The Watt Road, they scaled down what was originally planned because they didn't have the funding for it. And so we're in communication, we're having meetings, we've met with all the officials out there. I'm having conversations with the administration at TDOT, and we're still seeing if we can, what we can work out there. So it's an ongoing process. And there's other projects around the state that I'm having to work on too, but that's the one that concerns Knox County. Thank you.